Well, my name is Devon Brock-Montgomery, and I wanted to thank the Extension for this invitation and also just everyone for being here today. I'm really excited to give a brief introduction to agroforestry and start a dialogue with everybody here about what that can look like for them and to share resources and to answer some of those questions. So I'm planning on speaking for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. And with that, I will get started. So, Agroforestry 101, why the heck would you want to plant trees on farmland? And this is a question that we get quite a lot. And I think at the end of this presentation, that will become clear for a variety of reasons. And I always like to start with the fact that the Savanna Institute is essentially a network of partners. We're obviously Midwest based, and these are some of the partners that we work with. In Illinois, you may recognize the Liberty Prairie Foundation or the Delta Institute. But all of the work that we do together. And it's really that kind of network that gives us the synergy and the synthesis that we're looking for. So by no means our agroforestry practice something that the Savanna Institute have invented or have any sort of monopoly on. This work and these practices have been around for hundreds of years. And essentially what we're trying to do is to lay the groundwork for that and to advocate for it and to educate and just provide resources. So with that said, a little more about me. I am the Water Quality Program Manager at the Savanna Institute, and I have a background in forest or temperate forest ecology. I worked previously in climate change research, as well as with the National Park Service in about 8 states, which is doing long-term forest health monitoring. And so I kind of come into agroforestry with more of that forestry background, but we have quite a few staff now. There's about 30 of us, and it's really been wonderful to kind of compare perspectives and see where we can find common grounds in all of this, because essentially that's what it's all about. And the work that I focus on is in quantifying the reduction of nutrients and runoff into the Great Lakes Basin. So that's where I come in, but today I'm not really going to focus on that. I just want to introduce the 5 agroforestry practices, talk about a few of their benefits, and then have time for questions at the end. And before we jump in, just a little more about the Savanna Institute. We are a fairly small organization. We're about 9 years old, and we have 2 offices. One is in Madison, Wisconsin, where I am located, and there is another office in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois. So essentially, we're working to lay the groundwork for widespread agroforestry adoption in the Midwest US. And we get the name Savanna Institute based on the historical extent of the oak savanna ecosystem. And we have a variety of projects within Savanna Institute. So we work with education and outreach. So we have various podcasts and handouts. We have online classes that are available for agroforestry and getting started. We work directly with farmers to promote agroforestry adoption. We have a network of demonstration farms, 3 of which I will feature that are located in Illinois during this presentation. We do research on things like carbon sequestration and water quality, and we assess the genome of species like persimmons, and we breed cold hardy chestnuts. So it's a really kind of a holistic kind of organization right now. And let me see, I think my screen is frozen up. Oh, yes, okay, great. Sorry about that. So I always think it's important to start with talking about what was here before. And so Katie Adams is my colleague, and she is the community agroforester for the state of Illinois. And she's provided this quote, and it, you can obviously read it yourself, but East Central Illinois represents the heart of America's corn and soybean belt. And I think that's something that a lot of us are pretty familiar with. is the corn and soybean rotation. But I also just really want to outline that these are some of the best, deepest, and richest soils in the world as a result of the savanna and of the grazing and of the grasses that were here. So it's a really powerful area with a long history, and it's a resource that, you know, I don't want to take for granted, and I know that a lot of people here really value, and that's, you know, that's why the stewardship is here. That's why you're here. And I find a lot that when we talk about landscapes, we like to kind of parcel things apart. So in this picture, we can see the agriculture is pretty clearly delineated. We have our nature in the background and over to the right, and then the small conservation area in the foreground. And that kind of fragmentation is helpful to a point, but I believe that the perspective of agroforestry can help create more of a spectrum between these and works to address the false dichotomy that, you know, a landscape cannot have the elements of agriculture, nature, and conservation all together within it. Agroforestry, you know, with that framework, we find that we can actually make that happen. So what is agroforestry? Very simply, it's farming systems that integrate trees, crops, and livestock. And, you know, so we have our woody trees, we have our crops, which are generally perennial crops, and we have our livestock. And this looks like intentional combinations of trees with crops and livestock, as formerly mentioned. Intensive management of land. So, you know, that's maybe working and trying to get more resources or productivity out of land than may have previously been done. More intensive grazing, rotational grazing. Creating those interactive relationships between those three elements to create a more integrated function between them and to help find, you know, a good fit for whatever kind of values or variables that people are trying to manage for. And so a lot of the times folks ask why trees, and so obviously it's a perennial species. It doesn't need to be planted every year. So there's going to be reduced management there, as well as cost, at least in the long run. It's a woody, it's a resilient plant. I talk about the root systems here, and what I really mean there is just the benefits of, you know, the stabilization of the soil, the retention of the water, and also, you know, depending on the species, these native plants have longer and deeper root systems than potentially some introduced species would have. So root systems are really good to keep in mind. Obviously, trees provide habitat at a lot of scales. They can provide fodder for some of the livestock that we talked about. Yield support, so that can be anything from fruit or nuts, or using these trees for fence posts. And obviously, you know, beauty, there's an aesthetic quality here. And then water quality, which I will get into a little bit later. And so there's a number of benefits to agroforestry. And I think it's really great to lay them all out here. You know, and depending on folks' perspective, there's a lot of ways you can go with this. So first of all, it's a natural climate solution. According to the IPCC, this, you know, is one of the top 10 options for sequestering carbon and so on and so forth. Purification of water. You know, as I will talk about in a little bit later, these trees are filtering these, they're retaining these nutrients, they're filtering the water, and they, by virtue of being perennial, are creating reduced inputs like herbicides and pesticides. Diversification of farm income is also an element that we keep in mind here. So, you know, if you're not dependent on just one crop that is harvested one time a year, that can help you weather the storm if there's a situation that's difficult economically or on the ground, if there's some sort of, you know, natural disaster. And we know in forest health that having multi-story stands with multi-ages is essentially going to give you the most resilient unit. And so when those plants can serve to create income for you, that is a stronger, more resilient, and more diversified farm income. Sustainable communities, and that can look like a lot of different things. Some folks install agroforestry for food sovereignty purposes. Some of them just do it because they just want to maybe take a closer look at what the land that their family had been working for generations could be. As well, increases in biodiversity do come along with the tree habitat, like we spoke of. In terms of healthy local food, I feel like that's pretty just obvious. You know, we have our trees and nuts and our fruits. And, you know, that kind of self-sufficiency and independence can come in quite handy, especially as we're, you know, facing uncertainty regarding extreme weather events and heat events. Soil health, I talked about a little bit earlier. And then livestock comfort, I will get into a little bit more when we talk about the agroforestry practice of silvopasture. So there are 5 practices under the mantle of agroforestry, and I'm just going to go through each of them briefly now. And so alley cropping is another way to create diversified revenue streams. And essentially what it is the cultivation of crops in these alleys between regularly spaced rows of trees or shrubs. So a good example that I've seen is we have hazelnuts, and in between these rows of hazelnuts, we have asparagus, so another perennial crop, or a small grain. There's so many possibilities about what could be used here and planted. And so this is a higher land use efficiency and can create yield stability because you're not harvesting everything at the same time. And for example, in this figure, some of the trees can slow down the wind and kind of trap or harness the water so it isn't lost for the crops that are being planted in the alleys between them. And what you see in this photo is also that as the trees get older, so as we move from the left side of the screen kind of to the right, you can look at the phases of tree maturity and plant accordingly based on, you know, how much sun and how much shade they provide. Silvopasture is the next stop. It is the intentional integration of trees, pasture, and livestock, which is, you know, managed as a single system. So this could be grazing sheep, this could be grazing cows, pigs, chickens, often within some trees. And there's reduced stress as a result of the trees offering shade and like essentially like a psychological kind of space for these animals. And there have been a number of studies that as a result of that reduced stress and like thermoregulation, that these animals can actually have increased weight gain. And so you're thinking about, you know, kind of how this system works together. And so for animals like pigs and chickens, they're going to be grazing on the grass, right? And so that translates into a reduced feed cost. And so they're grazing on the grass, and they're also fertilizing the land with, you know, their feces. And it's, you know, in no way would I say that this is just like grazing a forest. This is very intentional. Stocking densities and rotational grazing are really, really important in keeping this in mind. And then the last thing I would say about this is that there are kind of 2 approaches here. So you can either take, you know, a pasture and add trees, or you can take an existing forest and thin it for silvopasture reasons. So there's quite a lot of flexibility there. All right, riparian buffers. So, you know, the riparian area is this kind of transitional space between a watercourse and the upland habitat. So that would be, you know, the field itself. And this is planting grasses, shrubs, trees, and herbaceous plants together to kind of create this unit that essentially protects the watercourse. And so that can slow down water, which will reduce erosion, that can trap some of those nutrients, which will increase the water quality of the stream. I also have a soft spot for brook trout. I don't know if there's any folks who fish here, but you know, we know that brook trout need cool or cold water streams. And so when you have these trees or these plants shading a stream, it's going to reduce the temperature of the stream. And then any sort of woody debris from that is going to create habitat for species like brook trout, as opposed to what maybe have been the before, which could be, you know, mowing all the way down to the water. So yeah, it filters pesticides, it filters nutrients, and this is, you know, a well-established practice that many of you may already be familiar with. So windbreaks, and I like windbreaks because I think that in some ways they're the most obvious of the 5 practices. You know, we all know what these are, we all know what they're for. And I think the kind of agroforestry twist on it is that we can use these windbreaks for food and fiber and fodder, depending on, you know, what the focal species is and kind of how much you want to manage it. As well, you know, I think a lot about how windbreaks by, you know, really busy highways or roads can reduce some of that sound coming onto a property. They can also reduce odor, believe it or not, in terms of, you know, if fertilizer is being applied. And with the appropriate height, density, and orientation, we know this to be true. We see it already. And I think it's just something good to keep in mind that, you know, when you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, that is woody perennial vegetation. And the last of the practices is forest farming. So this is cultivating crops under existing forest canopies. And so some examples of species could be ginseng, mushrooms. I've seen folks use ramps. I've seen people do ribes or currants. And a lot of the time, this can compete with invasive species. Obviously, there's, you know, going to be a need for management for that. But so, you know, you can have these plants there that you can, you know, your family can eat, or you can sell, or you can use them for any variety of reasons. And you're using an underutilized space as well as potentially managing for some of those invasive species at the same time. And so I mentioned earlier that agroforestry is by no means a new concept, right? And when I first started working at the Institute, I realized that this incredibly expensive product in the foodie world called jamón ibérico, which is Iberian ham, is actually from a silvopasture system, which I hadn't realized. And so in eastern Spain and a good part of Portugal, you have these oak savannas called dehesas. And based on what the diet comprises of for these pigs, as well as how purebred they are for this black Iberian breed, the cured meat can sell for up to $1,500 just for one leg. So it's known worldwide as an incredibly high quality, sought after product. And this is just another example of how agroforestry practices already exist. And I really like to use this example because it just keeps people thinking, like, so where is this already around us? You know, how is this already being utilized? And so in terms of Illinois, I want to give a couple examples of what agroforestry looks like here in the great state of Illinois. All right, so we have the Memorial 4-H Camp Farm. So essentially, this is focusing on more native species. We have oaks, hickories, walnuts, and this is just an example of what it can look like during the initial planting. So you'll see the tree tubes there, and then you'll see the netting for birds. And, you know, this is a really, really young planting. So these are going to grow up quite a bit. But you can also see the corn on the side there. So this can be implemented on any number of scales. We have the Allerton Park site, which is, I would say, pretty straightforward. So these are hedgerows, and the intention there is for wildlife and for profit. And there's actually a burgeoning hazelnut industry in the United States. By far and away, the majority of hazelnut production in the United States is in the state of Oregon right now, and worldwide is based in Europe. But I believe it's the American Hazelnut Company is already producing products like oil and flour and like a hazelnut snack that's all produced domestically. And it's just projected that this hazelnut industry is going to grow and grow and grow. So this is, in this specific example, this is a hybrid hazelnut. We have 2 native species of hazelnut in the upper Midwest that I'm aware of, and that's Corylus cornuta, which is beaked hazelnut, and Corylus americana, which is the American hazelnut. This is a hybrid of the latter. So this is a hybrid of the American hazelnut. And last but not least, we have Vulcan Farm. And I think this is a really good example of kind of a, an alternative take on what a windbreak can be. So we're putting all of these edible species, all of these native edible foods into a windbreak. So I just think that's really wonderful. And, it could even just be something that's not core to the business plan of your farm, or it could just be a pleasant thing for visitors or for your family to enjoy while creating that habitat and, utilizing the benefits of a windbreak that had been mentioned earlier. So I'm going to talk about agroforestry for water quality briefly because it's close to my heart. Essentially, we know that nitrogen and phosphorus runoff is an issue, within the Mississippi Basin that's going down to the Gulf of Mexico, and is resulting in a dead zone down there, which is a significant issue. And then also just the problem of soil erosion. And when soil erodes, or when subsoil is compacted, it's really hard to get away from that because soil does not accrue that quickly. So this, represents kind of the issue as it stands right now. Let's see. It's taken a minute again. Sorry about this. There we go. All right. So roots matter, and that's where perennial crops and trees come in. So these roots can stabilize the soil, they can hold on to the nutrients, they can prevent that water from creating gullies, and especially in cases of flooding and so on. So that is an example of how, establishing these plants can directly improve water quality. And this is a case from the state of Illinois where it's comparing different ways to reduce nitrogen. And we can see here on the bottom that perennial buffers and perennial crops are by far and away the most effective way to do this. And I talked about this a little bit earlier, but if we look at the surface water, it provides shade, which is really important as we're getting hotter days. That woody debris can help reduce the energy of flowing water. And then just the general stabilization of the soil. So it all comes together, and that's how you get this kind of integrated, coherent unit that is more resilient than it may have been before. And so looking at this now, the perspective of agriculture versus nature versus conservation, I think is of limited utility, essentially. And, it can get us somewhere, but to some extent, only so far. And I think especially as land access is becoming difficult and land is being used for development, there's any number of barriers that folks are experiencing right now that changing to a more integrated system of agriculture, conservation, and nature altogether, really mindfully and really intentionally, is a huge step forward and has tremendous potential for us here in the Midwest. And so in closing, I just want to mention, so again, Savanna Institute does provide one-on-one support. We have a team of technical service providers. Taryn had mentioned that there was a particular interest potentially in forest farming, and Sven Peel is one of our incredible TSPs that is based out of Illinois. So we're happy to provide that and help, create a design and then work through implementation, species selection, that entire process. And then there's also cost share scenarios if you're interested in going a direction with the NRCS. This is a list of the NRCS agroforestry practices for 2022. And so you can see that these line up one-to-one with agroforestry processes. So at the Savanna Institute, we can also help you navigate this and apply for cost share for these sorts of installations. And then I'm going to provide some resources on agroforestry to Terran that will be available after this presentation. Those can include one-page kind of info sheets on the 5 particular agroforestry practices. We have 12 kind of focal perennial species that we study and we really focus on that are particularly viable in the Midwest. Some of those species include elderberries, cider apples, chestnuts, hazelnuts, pawpaw. There's quite a few. And then we just kind of try to create as much as we can to make this accessible, again, to lay the groundwork. So again, I just wanted to start a conversation about what trees can look like on Illinois agricultural lands. And we also welcome you to join us for the Perennial Farm Gathering. This is our annual virtual meeting to kind of bring together folks from all over the world actually to talk about this work. So thank you so much for your attention, and please feel free to reach out to either Katie, who is the Illinois Community Agroforester, or myself if you have questions after this. Both of our emails are on the screen, and we'd love to hear from you.